The coffee shop fell silent. Not the comfortable quiet of a lazy afternoon, but the suffocating hush that descends when something extraordinary interrupts the mundane. All eyes turned to the corner table where Marcus Chen sat across from his father, watching a young barista's hands move through the air with practiced grace. She was signing. And his father, the William Chen, the steel-faced billionaire, who'd built an empire without ever showing weakness, was crying. Marcus had never seen his father cry, not when his mother died, not when doctors delivered the diagnosis that would steal his hearing, not during the brutal lawsuits, or the market crashes that could have destroyed everything. But here, in this ordinary Seattle cafe on an overcast Tuesday morning, tears streamed down William Chen's weathered face as this stranger spoke to him, in the only language that could reach him now. 15 minutes earlier, the day had been unremarkable. Marcus was attempting their weekly father-son meeting, a ritual that had become increasingly strained since William's sudden hearing loss 8 months ago. They'd tried everything, lip-reading classes, speech therapy, expensive hearing aids that William refused to wear, claiming they made everything sound like broken robots screaming. But mostly, they'd relied on Marcus's phone, typing messages back and forth like strangers in a chat room, the distance between them growing with every silent meal. "The usual?" Marcus had asked, already pulling out his phone to type. His father nodded, that tight expression. He'd worn since the diagnosis a mixture of frustration and resignation that broke Marcus's heart daily. William Chen had always been larger than life, commanding boardrooms with his voice, sealing deals with his legendary speeches. Now he was trapped in silence, and Marcus watched his father shrinking into himself a little more each day. The young woman behind the counter, her name tag read, "Emma," took their order with a bright smile. Marcus ordered a black coffee and a breakfast sandwich for his father, speaking clearly while William stared at the table. It was the same every week, Marcus feeling helpless, William feeling invisible, both of them pretending this was fine. Then Emma did something Marcus would replay in his mind for years to come. She stepped around the counter, walked directly to William, and positioned herself where he could see her clearly. Her hands began to move, fluid, expressive, purposeful. She was signing. William's head snapped up, his eyes widening with shock. His hands, usually so steady in business negotiations, trembled as he signed back, hesitantly at first. Then with growing confidence, Emma smiled, her hands dancing through responses, questions, observations. She was telling him about the weather, about the new pastries they'd just gotten in, about how she'd noticed him coming in every Tuesday. Marcus felt like an intruder watching something sacred. His father's entire body language had transformed. His shoulders straightened. The perpetual crease between his eyebrows smoothed out. He was leaning forward, engaged, animated in a way Marcus hadn't seen since before the diagnosis. For the first time in months, William Chen wasn't just occupying space, he was present. The conversation continued for several minutes. Other customers waited patiently, some pulling out phones to record what they sensed was a special moment. Emma's hands moved with practiced fluency, and Marcus realized this wasn't just basic sign language. This was ASL at a sophisticated level, the kind that came from years of dedication, not a weekend course. When Emma finally returned to make their drinks, William turned to Marcus with an expression his son couldn't quite read. His father's hands moved slowly, carefully forming the signs Emma had just been using. "She sees me," he signed, and then the tears came. They weren't tears of sadness. Marcus realized with a jolt that his father was crying from relief, from joy, from the simple, profound experience of being understood without translation, without technology mediating every word, without the exhausting burden of constantly explaining his needs. Emma brought their order personally, setting down the cups with a warm smile. Before Marcus could ask, she pulled out a small notepad and wrote, "I'm deaf, grew up signing. Your dad has a beautiful signing style, very expressive. You should learn too." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was this young woman working a minimum wage job, taking the time to connect with his father in a way he, the son, the family, the expensive specialists, had failed to do. They'd treated William's hearing loss like a problem to solve, a disability to overcome or compensate for. Emma had treated it like a different language to speak. Marcus looked at his father, really looked at him, and saw the years of isolation. They'd been building brick by brick with every typed message, every patronizing loud voice. Every time they'd carried on conversations around him instead of with him. They'd been making his father a spectator in his own life. "Can you teach me?" Marcus found himself asking, his voice cracking. "Please, can you teach me to sign?" Emma's smile could have lit up the entire city. She nodded enthusiastically and wrote down her information. "Free lessons. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Your dad is welcome too. He could use practice with native signers." Over the next 3 months, Marcus and William became regulars at Emma's informal ASL classes, held in the cafe after her shifts. What started as just the two of them grew into a small group, other hearing people with deaf family members, deaf individuals wanting to practice with new learners, bridge builders creating connections across the silence. Marcus discovered that his father had a wicked sense of humor in sign language, full of visual puns and expressions that didn't translate well to spoken English. He learned that William had thoughts and opinions he'd been keeping locked inside, not because he couldn't communicate them, but because the effort of typing everything had made spontaneity impossible. Through sign language, his father's personality reemerged. Sharp, funny, surprisingly tender. But the real transformation happened the day William decided to give a presentation to his company's board. He'd been avoiding the office, conducting business through emails and Marcus as an intermediary. His board members had been patient but concerned, and rumors were circulating about his fitness to lead. William walked into that boardroom with Marcus and Emma beside him as interpreters. He'd prepared a presentation entirely in sign language about the company's future direction. As Emma and Marcus voiced his signs, the board members watched in stunned silence. Some were confused at first, then moved, then inspired. For 8 months, William signed, his hands strong and certain. "I thought I'd lost the ability to lead. I thought losing my hearing meant losing my voice. But I learned something from a 24-year-old barista making $12 an hour." He paused, looking directly at Emma. "She taught me that communication isn't about how well you speak, it's about how well you connect. In my silence, I've learned to listen in ways I never did before. To watch. To pay attention to what people show me, not just what they tell me." The presentation was brilliant. The board approved every recommendation. But more importantly, they saw that William Chen wasn't diminished. He was evolved. Several board members approached Emma afterward, asking about learning sign language. One executive revealed his grandson was deaf and he'd been too intimidated to learn ASL. Within a month, the company had implemented ASL classes for all employees and hired 3 deaf consultants for accessibility initiatives. The local news picked up the story, not the corporate diversity angle, but the human one. They interviewed Emma, who downplayed her role with characteristic humility. "I just treated him like a person," she said through an interpreter. "Like someone worth having a conversation with. That shouldn't be revolutionary, but here we are." The piece went viral. Messages flooded in from deaf individuals who'd experienced similar isolation, from hearing people inspired to learn ASL, from families who'd been struggling with communication barriers. Emma's informal classes grew too large for the cafe, moving to a community center with dozens of students. Marcus stood in that crowded room one evening, watching his father teach a basic sign to a nervous newcomer, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude. Emma had given them back more than communication. She'd given them back each other. She'd reminded them that every person walking through the world carries invisible struggles, and sometimes the smallest gestures of inclusion create ripples that change everything. The billionaire father who'd thought his life was over had found a new purpose, advocating for the deaf community, funding accessibility programs, and teaching business leaders that disability wasn't a deficit but a different perspective. The son who'd felt helpless had discovered that learning his father's language was an act of love more powerful than any expensive solution. And Emma? She continued making coffee, teaching sign language, and treating every customer like they mattered, because in her world they did. She understood something the rest of them were only beginning to learn. That kindness isn't about grand gestures or charitable donations. Sometimes it's just about seeing someone, truly seeing them, and choosing to bridge the distance between 2 human hearts. The coffee shop that day hadn't fallen silent because something unusual was happening. It had fallen silent because people recognized they were witnessing something profound. The simple, revolutionary act of one person choosing to connect with another, no matter the barriers. In a world that often feels divided by 1,000 different languages, Emma had reminded them all that the most important translation is the one that says, "You matter, I see you, you are not alone." That's the power of humanity, not in the grand gestures we celebrate, but in the quiet moments when someone extends their hand across the silence and says, in whatever language necessary, "I'm here. I understand. You're not invisible anymore." And sometimes that's worth more than all the money in the world.